So in today's video, I want to talk about animating tables. And I ran into this working on a side project which had a table, and I tried to animate the rows on exit and found out it's a little bit more complicated than I thought. So this is unscripted. I just figured I would turn the camera on and kind of share some of the insights I've learned this week. And the final solution is not kind of as clean as I'd hoped, but just want to let you know what I learned and kind of my takeaways from this exploration. So I've got a brand new app here running in Next, and we've got Tailwind wired up, and I have Framer Motion, which is how I do my animations. And to start, I just want to talk about how I would animate a list. So let's just come and make a list right here. And we'll just say 1, 2, 3. And so if we want to animate a list, and maybe we can add some border bottom to these, we're going to need them to be able to change. So let's go ahead and let's just use state items, set items, and we'll start it off with just some strings 1, 2, and 3. And we'll import this. And now we can items.map each item to a list item. And we'll give this a key of item. So we've got a simple list here. And we can make a button to add an item. Let's give this some margin top. And that will be add, px3, py2 maybe. And it's a little aggressive. And then we'll have a remove like this, remove. And let's make this flex justify between. And so right here on click, we want to add an item. So function add item, set items. This depends on the previous items. So we'll splat those in and we'll just push a new item here. And let's just use items.length. Maybe we'll make these 1, 2, and 3. Item 1, 2, 3. Okay, so maybe length plus 1 here. So now we've got some items that we can add. Let's make these maybe py2. Give it a little padding. And let's make this remove work. So we'll say remove item is going to take an item. So when we click on click, we'll pass a function that we call remove item. Oh, I guess we want to put this on the actual item itself. So we'll add this to the list item. Let's wrap this in a span. And let's make this flex justify between like that. And maybe we can just make this, I think there's like a times, something like this, little button. And let's see here. Let's give this like a width of 4 and a height of 4. Okay, maybe 8. There we go. It looks pretty good. Let's go ahead and item center this. Little details matter, you know. And we'll get rid of this. Doesn't need to be flex anymore. We'll just text write this button. Okay, actually, let's just keep it to the left. So we can add items. And now when we click remove, we can pass in the item that we're mapping over. And we want to basically set our new items to filter the item that doesn't match the one we passed in, like that. What's wrong? I forgot this was TypeScript. I didn't want it to be, but that's fine. Okay, so add, remove, and add. Cool. So I guess we can have 2 items of 6. That's not that good. Let's just have like a seed, and when we add them, we'll just increase X. So we always kind of have a unique one like that. So now I can add 4, 5, get rid of 3, 2, and then we'll add 6. Just something simple like that. Okay, so we have like a simple list here, right? And in Framer Motion, it's pretty easy to kind of animate these in and out. So if we wanted to animate these in, we can turn each list item into a motion element, which we can import motion from framer motion. And now we can say initial is opacity 0 and animate is opacity 1, something like that. And now we can fade these in. And to fade these out, all we need to do is wrap these in an animate presence, which we can import from framer motion. And then on exit, we can say opacity is 0. So now we have the fade in and we have the fade out. But you'll notice, that the new items that are rearranging, that are updating, they just kind of jump. That's kind of a bummer. So there's kind of two ways to think about solving this in framer motion. One is to throw layout on this motion LI, and this way, if we hit X, we'll see that it slides. So that's pretty awesome that you just throw this prop right on here. It's very declarative. And what it's doing is these guys are going to look and see if any exiting or entering element has an effect on its layout. Then they're going to kind of use the flip technique, figure out where they're going to end up, undo that, and then use transform to basically smoothly animate to the new location. And you can customize this layout animation with transition, layout, and we could say, type spring, something like this. And now if you exit this, you'll see it kind of springs down, which is kind of fun. So that's how you customize that. But that's basically the idea here. But you'll notice that there's like this delay. And the delay is because the way animate presence works with its exit is that it's going to wait until the element has left in order to run that layout animation. So let's say we actually wanted to animate in with the height as well. So let's put a border around this. And if we were inserting like elements to the middle of this, you would want these to slide down. I guess we could do that. But yeah, I guess we could call like randomize on these. But just to show this, you can see, that the height is not smoothly animating on entrance. So if you didn't have a border, it wouldn't really matter. But as soon as you have any elements surrounding this list, you're going to want kind of the same behavior where it smoothly animates down. And so you can see that's not happening for the border either when we kind of remove these. These are smoothly animating, but you would want this border to smoothly animate as well. So the way you do that is by also turning this thing into a motion element, because basically this UL is now being affected by these exiting and entering elements. We need to do the same thing, motion.ul layout. And with any luck, we kind of have that nice behavior. And so now it's not working on exit. But I thought it would. Those layout animations, they can be a really nice solution to some problems. Let's pop open the console here and see. But even as you can see, like from this simple example, it's kind of hard sometimes to know how it all should work. I thought that this would do it, but it works on the way down anyways. So, when we add these elements, we could also, let's grow their height. And well, first we could make this overflow hidden so that we don't see this. And let's slow down the layout animation, transition, layout, duration, like 2. And let's put that on this guy as well. So now when we add, okay, so now you can see it's not overflowing. You might think that you want these to grow as well. So we could say initial is opacity 0 and height is 0 and animate height is auto. And you can see we're getting some animation on initial render. We can turn that off with initial false on the animate presence. And so this is a little bit closer. there's something funky going on here. I wonder if it has to do with this margin. Sometimes margins can throw these off. Well, anyways, you kind of get the idea. It's kind of tough to make this all work. Yeah, that one looked a little bit better. Sometimes these work very well, but sometimes they don't. So usually I actually don't always go with this approach, kind of for this reason. So let's undo all of this, get back to the normal UL. And this is the case where we just have adding and removing, but we have this kind of delayed movement. So if we got rid of layout, we've got enter and exit, but we want to get this smooth. So the second way to basically animate the height of something as it's entering or exiting is by animating the actual height. Now, again, if we were to throw layout on this list item and take a look at it, we'll be able to see they get the transform prop. So let's slow this down one more time just to make this point. Transition, layout, duration 10. And I'm going to look at item 3, which we see right here, and remove item 2. And we're going to see transform, translate 3D is how this is being run. So this is like GPU accelerated transforms. It's like a CPU. It's a CSS property that's GPU accelerated. And so typically it's going to be easier to make like 60 FPS animations using this, which is why layouts exist. And again, there are certain problems where they're perfect for, especially when you don't have to worry about reflows in the document. So if you have like a calendar that pops up in a modal and you want to just flick through the months, those are not going to affect the rest of the document. You don't have to start turning other elements into motion elements and adding layout everywhere. You don't have to sprinkle that everywhere. It's just like an absolute positioned element with some movement. Layout is a great solution for that. But the general case here is where adding or removing a list can affect the layout, right? And that's usually what we have when we're dealing with lists or tables in our web pages. And so if we get rid of layout, get rid of transition, come back to here, and what we can do is use height, the actual CSS property height, to animate. So let's say we wanted this to be height 0. So we've gotten rid of, all the layouts. We're back to square one. And Framer Motion can animate height from 0 to auto, which is a really awesome feature of Framer Motion because CSS can't do that. CSS can transition between values of height, but it can't animate from 0 to auto. So if we say height is auto right here, again, we have the initial render, which we can disable with initial false. And now we don't get that on initial render, but if we add, then we get some animation. Now there's something I want to figure out about what's going on here. Let's take off, we don't want to put the padding on the element that's being added and removed. That's what's causing it to have a hard time calculating the final width. So what we want to do is wrap this in a div, and basically I think we can just move all of these to this div right here. That's what we want to do. Okay, so now we're back in business. And if we go ahead and transition, layout, duration 2 or 5. Oh, it's not a layout. It's not a layout animation anymore. It's height. Then, well, there's the opacity was a lot faster. We can apply that duration to everything just by moving it out here. That will be used for all properties. And now we have a cool effect. Let's throw overflow hidden again on this so that we don't see any items appear below. Okay, so that's pretty good, right? And if we had more text down here, again, we can see already the border of the UL is smoothly animating. And if we had, some lorem down here, and maybe throw some margin on this, this is all going to work. And so that's pretty cool, right? But again, just kind of as a reference point here, if we look at, if we find this UL, actually it's not even the UL, is it? The UL is not changing. What's changing is these items as they get added. So if we slow this down again, let's slow it down to like 50 and hit add. So this is very slowly moving. If we can find this new guy right here, we're going to see the new LI is actually getting its height property to animate. So basically every time height changes in the document, you get reflows. Like the browser is recalculating all this layout, which is good in the sense that we don't have to do that. We don't have to tell it using layout attributes which parts should change and which parts shouldn't, which you might need to if you have certain performance requirements. But it's bad because reflows are expensive, generally expensive, and they could result in animations that are too slow. But if it works, it works. And in my apps, it works. And it's a nice solution because, again, look how easy this was. We just animate from height 0 to auto. Everything works. And on the way down, we still have this behavior where that doesn't work. But let's say on exit, we actually want height to be 0. Look at that. We get exactly the inverse of the behavior. And so there's this symmetry between adding and removing. We don't have that behavior where we wait and hold space for it to be removed and then shift it up like we did with the layout animations. So that's pretty nice. We can do that actually in this case with a prop called exit before enter on animate presence. And if we do that and we click X, whoops, that does hold space. I guess we would have to use absolute positioning for these. Well, there's a way to do that. But anyways, in general, I like the symmetry here where you add the item and as soon as you click it, it moves. And as soon as you click this, the table moves as well. I usually like to make the duration of opacity like 0.2 and then the height a little bit more, like, I don't know, 0.4. Let's see how that looks. Because then the item kind of fades out before it moves. So there's something kind of nice about that. So this is pretty easy. And like any list with divs and padding, you have a lot of control doing things like this. But what I was exploring this week was trying to do this with tables. You know, I like using Tailwind UI. They have a lot of really cool tables that are built with, you know, table body, T head, T body, table elements, TD for the cells. And of course, there's probably a lot of tables in the applications you work on. These days, you can basically make tables with divs, and there's proper kind of CSS attributes you can add to make sure that your tables that are made out of divs are properly accessible. It's good to use table markup as a base starting point because it makes the data in the table scrapable for web crawlers or tools that analyze websites. That makes it readable for screen readers. It's just more semantic. It actually has semantic meaning. This is a table row, and these are the columns of data. So there's also other attributes on things like table elements and TD elements like cell padding that you get access to and that a lot of times you want when you're actually displaying tabular data. But tables are kind of limited in terms of how you can adjust their size. So if I just collapse this and we go ahead and drop a table in here with a T head, and let's just say this is going to be, what is this, TH, right? TH. This will be like column 1, column 2, column 3, and then a T body. And then we'll map over our items and we'll render a TR with a TD of like column for item 1. Column 1, this is like 1 for item 1, 2 for item 2, and 3 for item 3. Okay, so this is kind of what we're working with. And let's put like a border on this. And what, with full? Okay. And so we see that we have something similar, right? And a lot of times you would have your delete right here, right? So let's make this a button times. And can we like center this? And let's make this with, what was it, 8? And border, rounded, something like that. So maybe you have like a list of users in your system, and you have an option to kind of delete them. So on click, we're going to remove item, and we kind of have the same thing that we want, right? We want to animate these in and out. So add some padding to this. Does that work? Maybe not. So let's see kind of how the approaches that we just saw work with tables. And first thing we can do is see if we can add. So when we click add, let's do the same thing. We'll turn this into emotion.tr. We'll say initial is opacity 0 and animate is opacity 1. Okay, so we've got some animation there. Let's see if we can wrap this in an animate presence and add an exit animation. Exit, opacity 0. That looks good, and this is not really working. So it's having a hard time right there. Let's add layout to this TR. Okay, something's not quite right here. Let's see. Oh, 2 children with the same key. Oh, don't have keys on here. Let's try that again. Okay, we've got this. Okay, so let's remove layout and see. We forgot the keys, so that was messing up the animation. Okay, so with just the exit animation, it does work. So we get the fade out, and this is basically the same behavior we had with our list. So let's see if we can use layout like before and get these to adjust. And that looks pretty good. So that kind of works for these table rows, which is cool. Again, there's something nice about the layout approach because it's very opaque. Frame of motion is kind of taking like a bitmap screenshot of your app in the 2 states, and then basically just stretching the picture of your app in the old position to the new position in size, which is why sometimes you see like distortion and stretching effects. But it's nice because it doesn't really care how things are laid out. It's not using the browser's layout engine to calculate the in-between states, which is why it can be really performant. It's basically like animating the size and position of an image. So we can see it's kind of working here, but we're back to the same thing where there's other elements being affected, and like the paragraph is not smoothly moving, the border of the table is not smoothly moving. And if you start doing some stuff like this, it gets a little bit hard. You can see there's some distortion here. Like this table is now moving, kind of, but kind of not. So again, when you have height-based entering and exit animations that are going to reflow the document, I find it usually easier to go the approach of animating the height. So that's what I wanted to do this week and try to find a way to do it. But it turns out that you can't actually animate the height of table rows. So if I come here to just the console and we take a look at this table row, we'll see the browser has given it a height of 34. If I come here, whether with just normal CSS and make it like 50 pixels, that works. But if I go below 34, we'll see that this actually doesn't have an effect. So I have height set to 0 by it, but there's a constraint because it's using like the table layout algorithm in CSS. To give this a height of 34, it says it has to be 34. It won't go below that. So if we wanted to shrink it with height 0, it turns out we can't really do that. So that's kind of a bummer. So the best we can actually do, let's just hide this. I was trying to figure out if there was a generalized way to basically do this with layout animations, and I got kind of far. I actually got far enough that it worked for the table in my app, which was great. It's a really nice solution. And I didn't have to change any of the markup, right? I didn't have to change the fact that I was using all these table elements, which I thought was nice if you are starting with a point where you have a table in your app and you want to animate it. It would be nice if there was a way to just do that without having to rewrite the markup. So let's see kind of how far we can get. And I want to show this little trick that I found out that did help. So we'll start with like the easy case here where there's no border, there's no content below. And what we want is the removal case to slide the rest of the children up. So if we put layout here, this is pretty good. Let's see actually if we put height 0 to height auto, do we get like growth? Okay, I guess not. That's fine. I think what I actually did in my case to grow the container was use my resizable panel, which I have in another video. That's what I was doing, and putting that around this entire thing to grow the container on add. So we could do that, but the thing I really wanted to solve for was this. So we can see basically the only way this works with layout is to hold space for a little bit and then shift the items, which again, in my app, I didn't want to do that. So I wanted to figure out if there's a way to trigger a layout animation as soon as this row was removed. Now, one thought I had was on exit to immediately set the display to absolute. So the idea with, maybe I can actually show you this. Let's say the display is going to be, if item is 0 and toggle is true, we'll make this absolute, otherwise we'll make it relative. And toggle is going to be a new piece of state. Starts out false. And let's just like use an effect to say window.toggle equals a function that calls set toggle to its opposite value. So what I want to do here is try to toggle the display property of this first row. Let's see if I got it right. We'll open up the console and say window.toggle. Okay, window.toggle, set toggle, false, should be true. Function that calls set toggle, and this is on exit. So let's put this on style and move display down here. Okay, so these are all display relative to start. And if I call toggle and we're working with the first item, display style. Well, first let's just see if we can make these absolute. I think there's something small I'm missing here. Oops, position absolute. It's Friday. Okay, cool. So when we make these position absolute, look, it takes them out of the DOM, right? So let's go back to this. And they'll start off as relative. Now we can see their position relative. They're getting that value from frame of motion. And if I call toggle, come on, window.toggle. It is defined, right? It's a function that's returning a function. Is a function that calls set toggle. Can I just do it right here? If type of window is not undefined, window.toggle. I'm like violating every rule of React right now, but I'm just trying to show a point here. Why does it still say position? Okay, position. If item is 0. Oops, first is item 1, sorry. unscripted coding. All right, so there we go. That's what I wanted to show you. Okay, let's be at least slightly good citizens and put this back in an effect. Should still work. Okay, so this is pretty cool because it gives you kind of an insight into how layout animations work. It's almost like they have a listener set up for, you know, properties that change that would cause them to have a layout shift. And at that point, Framer Motion stops, takes a snapshot, and then starts the layout animation from like the old position to the new position. So, you know, I'm just toggling this first item's position property on the style tag, and we can see, boom, these things adjust right away. So my thought was on exit, if we flip position to absolute right when we click it, we'll have solved that problem where instead of having to wait for it to run its exit animation, we click, it flips it to absolute. So we're gonna position it so it stays in the same spot. And then the layout animation on the other siblings will happen immediately, and we'll get rid of that delay. That was kind of like the whole thing that I wanted to do. So first step here is, let's see what happens. So if I say position is absolute, right on exit, and we click, you'll actually see it does set the position to absolute, but it's not triggering the layout animation of the sibling rows. And this was just kind of confusing to me. I thought it was going to do that, and I asked about it, and it has to do with how the exit animations and the layout animations are run in an effect at like the same time, so there's not a chance to do it. Anyways, basically this doesn't quite work. But there's actually another way to use animate presence that this actually kind of does work. So this is pretty cool because I hadn't learned about this before. There's a hook called useIsPresent that you can run to see if an element has been removed from the React tree. And Framer Motion keeps it around, right? Which is what allows you to run exit animations. But we can use this to update the style property. So the only thing is we have to make a new component boundary because hooks have to be per component. So that's exactly what we're going to do right now. Let's grab this, come down and make a TR component, and it's just basically going to return all of this and render a TR with key of item. So we got to pass in the item. And we got to pass in remove item as well. So we'll just pass this in. Remove item, remove item. And we'll define that as a prop. Okay, so we're back to exactly where we were. We can see the position is being set, but the layout animation for the siblings is not running. So now, instead of using exit, let's use isPresent. This gives us an isPresent prop that changes. And instead of putting this right here, we'll bring back our style. And instead of using this toggle thing, we'll just say, if we're present, we want it to be relative. Otherwise, we want it to be absolute. So save that, refresh. Look at that. So that's pretty cool. It basically behaves a little bit differently just because of the component boundary. But now you've got this kind of behavior, which is really cool, where it transitions right away. And again, in my app, you know, we can't animate in from 0 to height auto. So what I kind of did there was I animate this table again using the resizable panel plus overflow hidden. So that would actually animate this panel right here. Maybe we can bring that in at the end. And then that would give you the illusion that the height of the new row is growing. And then once you have that, it would also shrink while you do this and give the illusion that the table is changing as well. The table will be changing as well. But let's just focus on the removing case right now. So this is pretty cool. I thought this was cool that we can trigger the layout animation right away. But of course, we have some distortion here. And the reason we have distortion is we can just pop open this and click on this row right here, number 2. Change this to position absolute. And we're going to see right there, it's removed from the DOM, right? So if we gave it like a background of green and like a Z index, we're going to see it's just being calculated as a TR that's not part of any other table. So the table algorithm is just basically sizing these according to a standalone table row, which is not good, right? It doesn't match up with our columns. So in order to achieve this effect, we actually need to do some more work here to make this styled exactly the same, whether it's positioned absolutely or relatively. And so the first thing is we want to make this full width, and we want to make this a width relative to the body. So we want to give the body a position of relative, and that's going to give us that look right there. So let's add relative to the body. And when we exit, I think we can do, well, let's just actually go ahead and give each table row a width of full, right? So now let's come back to this row. We'll find it right here. We'll say position absolute. And okay, so now we have the row is the correct width, but the columns are obviously very different sizes. So we can see here, they're being laid out again, according to the algorithm. So it's just kind of hugging the content, and it's not respecting the rest of the calculations here. So the way I fixed this was by giving each column a fixed width. And, you know, one of the benefits of using tables is that you don't have to decide that. The table algorithm is doing a lot of complex things for you to actually calculate these widths and heights. But if you think about animating a table, if you're going to start animating this, and, you know, one of these things, let's make like one of them have, let's say, give it a lot of content, right? If item 2, we'll say if item is equal to 2, we'll add like a ton of lorem ipsum. Otherwise, we'll just say item. So let's just get that like that. I'll grab lorem like this, and we'll paste it in there like that. Okay, so obviously this is a little dramatic. Let's cut this down a little bit. But if you had, you know, a bunch of content, I guess we didn't need that much. If you have a bunch of content here, see the algorithm is going to allocate more space to column 2 because of the width of this item. But as soon as so if we got rid of item 1, these 2 items kind of look good. But if we got rid of this one, that's kind of weird. There's a shift, right? So if you imagine you want to add animation to a table, or, you know, you imagine any table that or list that does animate, something you would see in like iOS Mail or, you know, other native apps that do this, they're going to have fixed column widths because there's not really a clear natural way to make this work where the shifting elements are smooth. So it's kind of an extra step here that we want to set the column widths to be something hard-coded, but I think it actually makes sense once you think about adding animation. So let's do that. Let's come to our TDs, and just for starters, let's just give them all a class of 1/3. Okay, so there we go, right? You can see right there, they're all 1/3, and now this is working great in terms of the dynamic content not changing the layout. So the last step here is to just fiddle with this a little bit more and make it so that when we turn one of these into position absolute, it should be basically doing the same thing. So let's see what's going on here. This is 378. This is 33%. There might have been one more thing I had to do. Maybe Flex did it. So Flex gave me a little bit more predictability here. for these 1/3 to apply once this was absolutely positioned. So let's go ahead and throw flex on the table row. Or maybe we only want to apply this once we're out. So display will be, I guess it doesn't matter. What is the display of a table row? Computed, display. If we remove flex, computed, table row. Okay. So if we're present, we'll use table row. Otherwise, we'll use flex. And let's see if that gets us closer. We're basically trying to make it so that when we remove a row and out of the flow, it looks very, very similar, if not ideally identically to the existing row. So let's say display position absolute. Okay. And display flex. Okay, so that's pretty close. So let's refresh. Okay, you can see we're kind of getting closer. Now there's still some movement happening. And I think I found in my app that there's actually some default cell padding on tables. So you could just barely see things move just a little bit, but that was something I didn't realize. If we take this off and we look at these TDs, you'll actually see, look at that little green border around there. And if we hit computed, we'll be able to see that there's 1 pixel of padding around them. Again, this is kind of where tables get a little bit more complicated, and but they also give you some of these cool properties, so it might be worth doing it. But if we just set cell padding to 0, we're still getting a little bit of shift. Usually there's some padding that's the culprit. Let's remove this width and height of 8 and just see. So again, pretty close. There's still a little bit of shift. This is 394 by 26. Position absolute, display flex. We can see this is a little bit off. There might be some borders going on. Okay, well, I can't quite figure out why this is not lining up perfectly. It was in my app, but we could just actually make a little adjustment here. Let's see if we made this guy position absolute, display flex, and then, yeah, that one seems really off. Maybe we just need a line item center. Okay, that looks good. It's probably because I wasn't using flex. Maybe I was using something else. Do we need flex? I didn't think I needed flex in mine. I mean, table looks pretty good. I think there's probably some display here, but let's just do flex inline line item center. And that's okay. That takes up the whole spot. Okay, so now we're back in business. We just want align items to be center if we're not present. Okay. So this is pretty cool. I know that was a lot, but I do like that we were able to basically trigger these exit animations. Well, it's really the layout animations just from the fact of basically changing the position to absolute immediately for the siblings. So again, this did work out in the case of my application. And when you pair it with the resizable panel, I was able to get kind of the full effect of a growing and shrinking table without using the animation of height. We were able to just use the layout animation. So I thought that was kind of a cool landing point that I got to, and I like that I made it work. But as you can tell, it's not quite my dream where you come into a table, you want to animate a table row. So the steps are basically turn each row into a component, use is present, and then flip the position to absolute. Sometimes there's a little bit more work to do. I think there's probably a more general way to do this. I haven't tinkered around with it enough, but I didn't have to use flex in mind, so there's something else going on here. But it is pretty cool. I mean, you can effectively animate these rows. And again, we could do the thing where let's make the transition for opacity a duration of like 0.2. And that looks pretty good. And again, this was really nice versus what we had before. I think if we just remove this style, that's kind of what we had before. So that's really the main change right here. And then you have to do the work of making sure you have the fixed columns. But basically that lets you go from this, which again, I was just using it in the gym. You hit add and it grows right away. Then you hit remove and you wait a little bit and the table shifts. It just doesn't feel good. If you start paying attention to like how animated tables and grids work in apps, like in the Photos app, you delete it. As soon as you delete it, everything shifts. It doesn't wait for something to delete to then shift to the empty space. Most apps don't work like that. So I found that this was actually a pretty cool use. And I think this useIsPresent has a lot more use cases that I'm excited to get into. But basically, just by adding this style, we have this immediate removal, the immediate triggering of the layout animations for the siblings. So yeah, not quite the most generalized solution that I was hoping for by the end of it. And as you can see, there are just some funny things with dealing with like table layout and CSS that makes it a little bit more restrictive. And so a lot of folks these days do just use divs basically because they give you more flexibility when it comes to things like responsive design and animating the height. Being able to animate height down to 0 is pretty handy. If you do use divs for tables, just make sure you look up some of the accessibility properties that you'd want to add. I think it's like roll table and roll table head, all sorts of things like that. There's some libraries like React Aria that have like a use table and they give you a lot of those benefits and more keyboard shortcuts, things like that. So if I was going to do that again, just kind of like my button video, I would probably explore use table and see if that composes well with Framer Motion and gives us all of this behavior kind of packaged up in one deal. So yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting, and it was fun to get a little more comfortable with the useIsPresent version of exit animations in Framer because it's pretty cool. And otherwise, this list version, if you've never seen this before, hopefully you found that helpful. This is probably what I'm going to do kind of going forward is try to use lists and divs, even if I have like tabular data, look up those ARIA roles because I just find this a lot easier again when you're dealing with reflows. But in events where you already have tables, you might want to give this technique a shot in your app and see if it works. So that's what I wanted to show you today. Hopefully you learned a thing or two. And thanks so much for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.